Hoang An Prison sat quietly beside the Vam Co River, where the gentle morning sunlight stretched across vast green rice fields and rows of bamboo along the riverbank rustled softly in the breeze. From a distance, the place appeared like a peaceful painting of the Vietnamese countryside. Yet, beyond its towering walls and solid iron gates lay a completely different world. A world where those who had lost their way were now held captive under strict discipline. Life inside the prison followed a monotonous and unwavering routine, like a clock that never missed a beat. Each day, inmates woke up to the sound of the morning bell, worked in silence, and then returned to their cold, dimly lit cells, where the darkness of night was barely pushed back by a faint glow. Yet, deep within their weary eyes, there remained a flicker of something, perhaps regret, or a fragile hope for a second chance at life. But that quiet routine was soon shattered. One early winter morning, Nurse Lee stepped out of the medical room, her face pale. In her hand was a medical report, one that no one had expected. An inmate was pregnant. The news spread like a cold wind through the prison walls. Within just a month, 4 more cases were discovered, turning this once orderly and tightly controlled facility into the center of whispered suspicions and rising tension. Ms. Tom, the prison warden, a woman who had spent over 2 decades maintaining order in this place, was shaken. Under the flickering light of her office, she silently read through each report, a growing sense of unease creeping over her. Hoang An Prison, once considered impenetrable, was now facing an unsettling mystery. Now, Hoang An Prison seemed to be facing an inexplicable mystery, challenging the very rules that had once been considered unbreakable. That night, Miss Hun sat silently by the window, gazing out at the empty courtyard, where the moonlight cast a pale glow over the cold prison walls. She wondered, how could something like this happen in such a tightly controlled place? Who were these pregnant inmates, and why were they keeping silent? In the dim light, fleeting images of anxious eyes flashed through her mind, a haunting reminder that the truth might be far beyond anyone's imagination. News of the pregnancies spread through Hoang An Prison like a chilling wind, drifting through every cold cell, every silent corridor. It was not a raging storm, but rather an invisible undercurrent seeping into the deepest corners of every mind, both inmates and guards alike. No one spoke of it openly, yet the wary glances, the furtive looks, and the heavy sighs made the air feel more suffocating than ever. For the inmates, this mystery was not just about others, it was like a mirror reflecting their own vulnerability. They looked around, silently questioning who would be next. How could this happen in a place where every step was closely monitored? Even the toughest among them could not hide their unease. Young women whispered in hushed tones from the shadows, their anxious eyes avoiding direct contact. The older inmates merely shook their heads, trying to appear indifferent, but their trembling hands betrayed their fear. Amidst the growing unrest, an unspoken sense of dread quietly took hold. Warden Tan maintained her usual tough exterior, but deep down, she could not ignore the creeping sense of unease. It was a feeling as if the ground beneath her feet was no longer stable. Having dedicated her life to upholding discipline and order in this place, she would not tolerate any form of disorder. Sitting in her dimly lit office, she studied the neatly arranged reports on her desk. Each line she read felt heavier, striking blow after blow against her belief in Hoang An's impenetrability. "We must uncover the truth," she declared in an urgent meeting with the prison officers. Her voice was not loud, but it carried undeniable authority. Orders were issued immediately. Additional surveillance cameras were to be installed in every corner of the prison. From familiar areas like the cafeteria and the labor yard to the usually quiet garden, no place would be left unmonitored. Nothing must be overlooked, she emphasized, her sharp gaze sweeping across the room, ensuring that no one would dare to be negligent. Meanwhile, Nurse Lei was assigned a different task. With her gentle demeanor and warm smile, Lei had long been trusted by the inmates, regarded as someone they could confide in. For this reason, Warden Tan believed she was the right person to approach them, to listen to what they might not be willing to share with anyone else. Began her work with casual conversations, her questions seemingly simple, but carefully crafted. Yet all she received in return was prolonged silence or vague, elusive answers. A prisoner lowered their head, their voice so faint it nearly dissolved into the air. "I don't know anything." Though they tried to conceal it, their eyes betrayed an undeniable sense of anxiety and unease. Among the many unfamiliar faces, one person particularly caught La's attention: Nhan. The young woman often sat alone by the window, her gaze lost in the emptiness of the prison yard. Unlike the others, she did not display fear. In her eyes, Lei saw not only sadness, but also a secret buried deep within. Lei sat across from Nhan, her voice soft and patient as she tried to ease into the conversation. But Nhan only lowered her head, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "If something is wrong, you can tell me. I'm here to help you." Lei's tone was gentle, full of encouragement. Yet, Nian simply shook her head, and when Lei looked deeper into her eyes, she saw something beyond fear. She saw guilt. Lei left Nian's cell with a heavy heart. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she was certain that Nian knew more than she was letting on. The secret she carried seemed to be the key piece of the puzzle that had engulfed Hoang An in mystery, and Lei knew that if she couldn't unravel this knot, the rising undercurrents would only grow stronger, threatening to sweep everything away. Later, as she reviewed the surveillance footage, Lei noticed something that made her pause for a long moment. On the flickering screen, familiar images played, a lone figure moving quietly through the hallway. Engen was not like the other inmates. She had a strange habit. Every late afternoon, Nian would quietly make her way toward the bamboo garden tucked in the far corner of the compound, a secluded place where few ever ventured and where the security cameras could only monitor a small section. Her steps were slow and deliberate, as if afraid that the slightest sound might give away the secret she was trying so hard to conceal. What caught Nian's attention the most was Ian's expression when she left the bamboo garden. It wasn't the vacant stare of someone resigned to prison life, but the gaze of a person burdened by heavy thoughts, someone hiding something. That look unsettledly, as if it were silently telling her, there is a secret here, but I cannot speak of it. That night, Lee tossed and turned, unable to sleep. She replayed every subtle movement, every glance Nian had cast in the surveillance footage. A strange feeling crept over her, part curiosity, part fear. There was something far more significant lurking beneath the surface of this seemingly tranquil prison. The next morning, without hesitation, Lee decided to investigate the bamboo garden herself. That afternoon, golden sunlight bathed the towering bamboo, creating a serene atmosphere so peaceful that for a moment, Lee felt as if she had stepped into a painting. A gentle breeze whispered through the leaves, filling the air with the soft rustling of nature's lullaby. But as she ventured deeper, that sense of tranquility was gradually replaced by an inexplicable tension. Slowed her steps, her shoes barely making a sound as they brushed against the thick carpet of fallen leaves. Her eyes scanned the surroundings. Dense clusters of bushes and overgrown foliage gave the garden an eerie stillness. Then she froze. Right before her stood a bamboo thicket, significantly larger than the others. Its leaves were layered unusually thick, as if intentionally shielding something hidden beneath. Lee stepped closer. Her heartbeat pounded loudly, each thud resonating in her chest like an unspoken warning. She crouched down, gently pushing aside the bamboo branches. A musty scent filled the air, mingling with the earthy dampness of soil that had remained undisturbed for years. Beneath the dense undergrowth, a small wooden door emerged, nearly hidden beneath the thick roots clinging stubbornly to the ground. Its weathered surface and rotting wood hinted at its age. It had been here for a long time, as if belonging to an era long forgotten, a secret buried by time itself. A chill ran down Lee's spine, not because of the wind, but because this door felt like the final piece of a puzzle, revealing a much larger mystery than she had ever imagined. She straightened up, exhaled slowly, and tried to steady the surge of anticipation rising in her chest. Without hesitation, she turned and hurried back to report to Madame Than. As Lee finished recounting what she had found, Madame Tan's expression grew heavier. Her sharp gaze lingered, scrutinizing every word. Finally, she stood up, her voice calm yet unwavering. We must investigate immediately. Nothing can be left beyond our control. That evening, under the fiery glow of the setting sun, a small group, including Madame Tan, Lei, and several prison guards, returned to the bamboo. The air was thick with tension, so heavy that even their footsteps seemed to echo with unease. They formed a circle around the large bamboo thicket, every gaze fixed on the concealed wooden door beneath the entangled roots. Madame Than gave a slight nod, signaling a guard to start digging. Layer by layer, the earth fell away, gradually exposing the door more clearly. Another guard stepped forward and, with a firm grip, yanked at the wood. Slowly, with a groaning protest, the aged door creaked open. Below, a narrow, pitch-black tunnel stretched into the unknown. Deep and foreboding, it looked as though it led to an entirely different world, a place where light and truth had never reached. The air rising from the tunnel was chilling, like an invisible hand brushing against Lei's nape. She held her breath, feeling every nerve in her body tighten. This door, this tunnel, was not just a passage. It was an opening to a mystery far greater than they had ever imagined. Under the dim twilight, as the sun faded into nothing more than a faint red streak on the horizon, the investigation team stood frozen in silence before the unexpected discovery. Beneath the thick undergrowth, a small wooden door was revealed, ancient and decayed by time. Thick roots clung tightly to its frame as if trying to shield a secret that had been buried for years. The air around them seemed to hold its breath, and so did they. Madame Than gave a signal, and one of the guards stepped forward. He wedged a crowbar beneath the door and pried it open. A long, creaking sound echoed through the air, making everyone flinch. Beneath the door lay a pitch-black void, stretching deep into the earth, a place untouched by light. The cold, heavy air seeped out, carrying the damp scent of time itself, the unmistakable mustiness of earth long sealed away, mixed with the breath of a secret that was now slowly unraveling. Le crouched down, peering into the darkness. It felt as if the shadows were whispering to her, telling a story they had kept hidden for years. "What is this?" she murmured, her voice so soft it was barely audible even to herself. Madame Tan stepped closer, her sharp gaze narrowing. With years of experience, she knew all too well that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. "Proceed with caution," she instructed, her voice calm yet commanding. A flashlight clicked on, its dim beam sweeping across the tunnel's old brick walls, illuminating the unknown path ahead. The bricks were cracked, some entirely covered in moss, yet the path was undeniably one that had once been used by people. After a period of exploration, the group discovered that this tunnel was not a mere coincidence. It extended from the women's prison, running beneath the earth and leading to a desolate area on the far side of the river. Standing at the entrance, Lei's gaze held both sorrow and curiosity. She silently reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold brick wall as if trying to feel the stories it had witnessed through the years. "Perhaps this tunnel was built during the war," she said, breaking the silence. "It could have been a shelter or an escape route, but somehow it has become something else." Madame Tan looked at Lei, her eyes filled with contemplation. If Lei's theory was correct, then this tunnel was not just a relic of the past. It could hold the key to the mystery that had haunted the prison for weeks. The truth behind the pregnant inmates, something she once believed to be impossible, might now have an explanation. But with that revelation, the weight of her responsibility grew heavier than ever. "We need to find out exactly who has been using this tunnel and for what purpose," Madame Thon murmured, almost as if speaking to herself. Her voice, usually firm and resolute, now carried a hint of exhaustion, as if the burden she bore had become too much to carry. Lee said nothing, only nodding slightly. She knew that ahead of them lay a long journey to uncover the full truth, yet deep within her, a vague feeling began to rise. A sense of empathy for those who had sought refuge in this tunnel. People who perhaps had been yearning for what life had taken from them. Love, freedom, and a small glimmer of hope. In the cold and unfamiliar world they inhabited, the darkness of the tunnel still lingered, enveloping everything. Yet in Lei's eyes, a quiet determination was beginning to emerge. No matter where this story led them, she knew she had to face it, not only to uncover the truth, but also to understand that even in the deepest darkness, there could still be glimmers of humanity. Hoang stepped into the management office hesitantly, her small shoulders drawn inward as if trying to shrink under the weight of the stairs in the room. The door closed behind her with a sharp click, sealing off the world outside and leaving her alone to confront the truth that lay ahead. Madame Tan sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, her gaze sharp and unwavering as she observed Hoang's every movement. Beside her was Lei, the only one in the room whose expression carried a touch of gentleness. Yet even in her eyes, there was an unmistakable trace of concern. Nan lowered her head, her fingers clasped so tightly together that her knuckles turned white. She said nothing, standing motionless like a shadow. Lei leaned forward slightly, her voice soft yet firm enough to break the tension in the room. Then, "And you don't have to be afraid. We're not here to make things difficult for you. Just tell us the truth and everything will be easier for everyone." But Ngan remained silent, her gaze fixed on her trembling hands. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The only sound in the room, the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Lei waited patiently, her eyes never leaving Ngan's face, where a storm of emotions was slowly surfacing. And then, at last, Ngan broke. She sobbed, her cries shattering the fragile silence of the small room like a storm tearing through the calm, raw, unrestrained, and impossible to contain. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but Mangdan's shoulders no longer trembled. She lifted her head, her tear-filled eyes meeting Lei's gaze. Her voice was broken and unsteady. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to see him." Mangdan furrowed her brow slightly, sitting up straighter, but she remained silent, her sharp gaze fixed on every word Mangdan uttered. Lei nodded, her voice gentle, as if trying to calm the storm raging within the young woman. "Who is he, Nen? Can you tell me?" Nana took a deep breath, struggling to steady herself. "He's my lover, before I came here. He's a fisherman from the village across the river. We promised to wait for each other, but I couldn't bear the loneliness anymore." Her voice caught in her throat, the pain evident in every word. Nick gently placed her hand on the table, not to pressure her, just to remind her that she wasn't alone. Ganan continued, her voice trembling but clearer than before. "I found the tunnel one day while working in the garden. I didn't think it was still usable, but I tried at the end of the tunnel. It led to the riverbank near Ty's village. I just wanted to see him, to hear his voice, to feel like I still had someone waiting for me. That was all." Nan lowered her head, tears continuing to fall. For a moment, the entire room was silent, as if holding its breath. Only Lei's quiet sigh broke the stillness. heavy with contemplation. "It wasn't just you, was it?" Madame Tan's voice cut through the lingering silence, low, firm, but piercing. Ingan shook her head without looking up. "No. It wasn't just me. Some of the other women knew about it too. We only wanted to hold on to a piece of the life we had before. None of us meant to do anything wrong. We just wanted to feel like we were still human." Gon's final words cast an even heavier silence over the room. Lee felt her heart tighten. She understood. Within the darkness and isolation of the prison, those secret meetings had been the only light keeping them from sinking into despair. But now, that very light had led them to consequences no one could escape. Madame Ten stood up, her gaze sweeping across the room before pausing on Lei, then turning to Ngan. "Ngan, you must understand that your actions don't just affect you. They affect this entire prison. We cannot allow this to continue." Her voice wasn't harsh, but each word carried the weight of responsibility. Ngan lowered her head, not arguing. Tears kept falling, but she knew that any defense at this moment would be meaningless. Lee watched Engin's small figure as she left the room, a deep heaviness settling in her chest. She couldn't blame Engin nor the other inmates. They were just people longing for love, something life's cruel hands had stripped away from them. But now that longing had turned into an undercurrent, pulling them all into an unstoppable spiral. Outside, the sunset bathed the sky in crimson hues, its light filtering through the window, casting flickering shadows on the floor. Lei took a deep breath, her eyes filled with contemplation. She knew this story was far from over. A long journey lay ahead, one where they would have to face the truth. A truth both deeply human and profoundly painful. That day, Ningen had been called in to explain herself. At first, she remained silent, head bowed, but under Lee's patient presence, she finally broke down, tears spilling as she confessed everything. The warden's office was shrouded in heavy stillness. The only sound piercing through the silence was the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Inan sat in silence, her presence as still as a shadow. Her eyes were fixed on the dark wooden table before her, fingers tightly intertwined, pale and trembling with barely concealed tension. Across from her, Mrs. Tan sat with a piercing gaze. As the manager, who had been here for over 2 decades, she scrutinized every subtle change in Gon's expression. Beside her, Lei sat quietly, her eyes softer but filled with worry and concern. The air in the room felt heavy, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the words struggling to escape from Gon's trembling lips. Les spoke first, her voice gentle and patient, as if trying to ease the younger woman's distress. "We're not trying to pressure you, but we need to know the truth. Once you speak, everything will become clearer for all of us." Nien remained silent, her head bowed. Strands of hair fell forward, partially hiding her gaunt face, but Len noticed the slight tremble of her shoulders, followed by a quiet, stifled sob. Suddenly, the silence shattered, as Yan broke down in tears. She covered her face, her sobs spilling out freely, no longer holding back. Tears streamed down her cheeks, each drop carrying the weight of sorrow and frustration she had bottled up for so long. Now she could no longer suppress it. I don't want to lie. I can't keep lying anymore, she choked out, her voice breaking between sobs. Liz said nothing, allowing her time to compose herself. Her gaze remained gentle, as if silently offering strength to the young woman before her. Finally, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, Ungan spoke. "Antai, he was my lover before I came here. We've loved each other since we were children, back in the village across the river. He and I promised to wait for each other no matter how long it took. But I couldn't bear the loneliness anymore. I missed him so much." Yan looked up, her tear-filled eyes reflecting an unrelenting sorrow. "That tunnel, I found it while working in the bamboo garden. At first, I didn't think it was still usable, but I decided to try. I kept walking, and in the end, it led me to the riverbank, near Tai's house." Lei listened, her heart tightening. In Sungan's eyes, she saw the despair of someone trapped between hope and unbearable pain. "He came to see me at night," Nun continued, her voice trembling but resolute. "We only talked. He brought me small things, sometimes a letter. Those moments were the only light in the darkness of my life." Mrs. Thon furrowed her brow slightly, her sharp gaze filled with sternness. "It wasn't just you, was it?" she asked, her voice low and firm. Nun lowered her head, unable to meet her gaze. After a long pause, she whispered hoarsely, "No, it wasn't just me. Some of the other women knew too. They also used the tunnel to see their loved ones. But we never meant to break the rules. We only wanted to hold on to a small piece of the life we once had." The room fell into an eerie silence, the only sound a quiet sigh from Lee. She could feel the immense sorrow in Gun's story, but at the same time, she understood the heavy responsibility it carried. "Do you understand what your actions have led to, Engin?" Mrs. Mann's voice finally broke the silence, carrying the weight of a warning bell. "What seemed harmless at first has now resulted in severe consequences. Some of them are pregnant, and beyond that, we are now facing security risks that none of us could have foreseen." Nan bowed her head even lower, silent tears falling onto the table. I know it was wrong, Nan choked out, but at that moment all I could think about was I couldn't live without hope. Lee looked at Nan, her heart heavy. It wasn't just Ingen. All of them were simply people trying to hold on to a fragment of warmth, a thread of connection to the life they had lost. But now, that very longing had pulled them into a vortex from which there was no escape. We will find a way to resolve this, Mrs. Tan finally spoke. Her voice was gentler now, but her firmness remained. But Nan, you must understand, every action has consequences. We cannot overlook this, but we also won't let it continue to cause harm. Ningen only nodded silently, tears still streaming down her face. As she left the room, Lee watched her go, a bitter ache settling in her chest. People like Neon, even when they made mistakes, were still just human, longing for love, for remembrance, for hope. And yet in this place, such things had become a luxury. Darkness crept in outside the room, but in Lee's eyes, a faint light still flickered. No matter how difficult the road ahead might be, she knew she would keep trying, not just to find a solution, but to preserve whatever hope and humanity remained in these people's harsh lives. The children born inside the prison were unlike any others. Their first cries did not echo in a brightly lit hospital room, but within cold, confined walls, under the weary and anxious gazes of mothers who lived behind bars. Those cries were both pure and sorrowful, a greeting to the world laced with both joy and pain as these newborns were placed into the waiting arms of their mothers. The space fell silent. Women who had once been strong, who had once accepted their fate, now let their tears flow freely. Droplets rolled down their gaunt faces as they gently touched their child's tiny hands, memorizing every delicate feature as if engraving them onto their hearts. But they knew this moment could not last forever. I can't let my baby go, one mother sobbed, her voice breaking between gasps. Yet they had no choice. These children could not grow up behind cold prison walls, confined by rigid rules and barriers. Their families, relatives still living in freedom, were allowed to take them home and raise them. On the days when the children left, the prison fell into an eerie silence. The mothers stood by the windows of their cells, watching their children disappear beyond the massive gates. They did not scream, nor did they wail. They simply watched, their tear-filled eyes brimming with love and an unbearable sense of loss. My child, never forget that I love you. I will change. I will come back for you. Those whispered words lingered in the air, unheard by anyone except the women themselves and their bleeding hearts. Under Mrs. Tan's leadership, Hoang An Prison introduced an unprecedented humanitarian policy. Incarcerated mothers were allowed scheduled visits with their children. These meetings lasted only a few short hours each month, yet their significance was immeasurable. In their simple prison uniforms, the mothers trembled as they held their children, whispering words of affection, pressing soft kisses onto their foreheads, pouring all their love into those fleeting moments. The atmosphere in the prison began to shift. Women who had once been lost, who had once surrendered to despair, now found a reason to live, a purpose to fight for. They no longer worked just to shorten their sentences, they worked to save even the smallest earnings, hoping to buy gifts for their children. Inside the prison cells, skilled hands carefully knitted warm sweaters, sewing tiny fabric dolls with meticulous care. Sister Lei, do you think my daughter would like this doll? The young woman who once silently buried her pain now beamed with joy whenever she spoke about her little girl. Lei nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She'll love it. But more than that, she'll be proud of you for trying so hard for her. These mothers now lived with a newfound hope, a renewed determination. They were no longer merely prisoners weighed down by past mistakes. They were women striving to rebuild their lives for the children born into adversity. As Mrs. Dan walked through the prison corridors, she saw the once gloomy faces now glowing with determination. A quiet relief settled in her heart. The decision she had made all those years ago had not extinguished the last light in their lives. Instead, they had proven that even the faintest hope had the power to transform a person. Years passed, the children who had left the prison nursery grew up in the arms of their families. One day, the prison gates swung open. A young man stood there, eyes bright with emotion, a small bouquet in his hands. I am Nyan's son, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I came here to thank you, all of you, who never gave up on my mother. You gave her the chance to start over. Mrs. Tan stood motionless, gazing at the young man before her. In that fleeting moment, she knew every effort, every difficult decision she had made had been worth it. Life could be cruel, but love and hope would always find a way to break through every barrier. Those who once lost their way now have the chance to step into the light, not just for themselves, but for the people they love the most. And the children born within towering prison walls stand as the clearest testament to the power of forgiveness, opportunity, and love. Years passed, and Hoang An Prison took on a new face. It was not just the freshly painted walls walls or the newly planted trees lining the courtyard. The true transformation lay in its essence. Hoang An had become a symbol of rebirth, hope, and compassion, a place where lives once thought forgotten found their way back into the light. In the past, the name Hoang An evoked images of strict discipline and rigid rules, but now it no longer brought to mind towering walls or cold iron gates. Instead, it became synonymous with stories of redemption, of people who had strayed but ultimately found their way back. It became a testament to those carrying the weight of remorse, yearning for a second chance in the light of the children who forever changed them. The young nurse who had devoted her youth to caring for and comforting the women in the prison had since become a doctor. She left Hoang An long ago, yet its memory remained an indelible part of her soul. Every time she walked through the brightly lit hospital corridors or quietly noted a patient's condition, the faces of those who once struggled in the darkness resurfaced in her mind. La still remembered those eyes, the eyes of Neon, who had once stepped into the office filled with fear and guilt, but then a faint glimmer of light appeared when she spoke of her little daughter. The eyes of mothers holding their newborns for the first time, trembling not just from joy but from the pain of knowing they could not yet keep their children by their side. And the eyes of Mrs. Than, the prison warden, stern yet contemplative, the woman who chose to offer a chance instead of shutting every door. Hoang An was no longer a place of silent weeping at night, of dreams cut short. It had become a living testament, a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, love and hope could still take root. The children who had once been born within its cold walls had now grown up, carrying with them stories of resilience and compassion. One day, while immersed in her work, Lei received a letter. It was an invitation from a young man who introduced himself as the son of a former inmate of Hoang An. "I would like to meet you," he wrote, "to express my gratitude on behalf of my mother, the one who always spoke of you as a guiding light in her darkest days." Pulling the letter, Lei felt her eyes well up with tears. In that moment, she realized that everything she had done at Hoang An, the seemingly small conversations, had left a far greater impact than she had ever imagined. At a commemoration ceremony, as the prison gates opened, those who had once walked its halls returned, not as prisoners, but as free individuals, carrying gratitude in their hearts. An elderly woman, holding her grandson's hand, gazed at Mrs. Tan and Lei with deep pride. "Because of you, I found myself again. Now, I live to make amends, to my family, and for all that I once lost." The story of Hoang An was not just a lesson for those who had strayed, but also for those who had chosen to believe in redemption and offer second chances. It was a testament that, no matter how grave the mistakes one had made, a spark of light always remained within, and that love, no matter how fragile, possessed the strength to transcend all barriers, to lead people back to themselves. Under the crimson hues of the setting sun, Hoang An stood not just as a prison, but as a symbol of rebirth. The stories born within its walls had become beacons of hope, illuminating the path for lost souls, reminding them that no matter how difficult the journey, they still deserved a chance to begin anew. Because love and hope never fade, dear audience, we sincerely appreciate you taking the time to listen to this heartfelt and meaningful story. This is not just a collection of emotional moments, but also a profound lesson on love, hope, and the power of forgiveness. No matter how many mistakes we make or how great the challenges we face in life, there is always an opportunity to start over if we are brave enough to believe and patient enough to wait. If this story has touched your heart, please show your support by liking the video, leaving a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribing to our channel so you won't miss more meaningful stories in the future. Your support is a tremendous motivation for us to continue bringing high quality content. Once again, we sincerely thank you and wish you good health, happiness, and a life filled with love. See you in the next story.